In the 1960s, a decade of massive cultural shifts, there was a quiet sanctuary on television. It was a high-rise apartment in New York City that, for millions of Americans, felt like coming home. This was the world of Family Affair, a show that presented a revolutionary idea in a traditional package, that family isn't just defined by blood, but by love. At the heart of this on-screen family were two of the most unforgettable faces in TV history, the angelic twins, Buffy and Jody. The little boy with the fiery red hair and a spray of freckles was Johnny Whitaker. As Jody Davis, he was America's son, a symbol of childhood innocence. Week after week, audiences watched him and his sisters build a new life with their stoic, loving Uncle Bill and the proper Mr. French. The show was a comforting reminder of goodness in a complicated world. But behind the warm studio lights, a different story was playing out. For the young actor at the center of it all, the line between performance and reality was starting to blur in a deeply painful way. To millions, he was the lovable Jody. But for Johnny Whitaker himself, one episode in particular serves as a perfect, painful example of the pressures he faced. What happened during the filming of Mrs. Beasley, Where Are You?, in 1966 that required a 6-year-old actor to access a level of trauma he was too young to understand? This isn't just a story about a tough day on set. It's the story of a childhood wound and the immense, often invisible, pressure placed on the smallest shoulders in Hollywood. To understand why 1/2 hour of television became a symbol of this struggle, we have to go back to the beginning, to a world that looked like a fairy tale, but was far more complicated. Family Affair premiered in 1966 and was, in many ways, ahead of its time. The premise itself was born from tragedy. Bill Davis, a successful and swinging bachelor, suddenly becomes the guardian of his late brother's 3 children, teenager Sissy and the young twins, Buffy and Jody. He was a globe-trotting man suddenly tasked with raising a family he never expected. Into his modern Manhattan life, complete with a British gentleman's gentleman, Mr. French, dropped 3 orphans dealing with an unimaginable loss. The show's genius was its delicate balance. It was a sitcom, but it was also a drama, a dramedy, as the cast later called it. It didn't ignore the sadness at its foundation. The children, especially Buffy and Jody, often spoke of their deceased parents, which gave the series a reality that resonated with audiences. The show suggested that grief wasn't something you just get over, but something you learn to live with, and that a new, loving family could make that possible. At the heart of it all were the twins. Johnny Whitaker and Anissa Jones, who played Buffy, were a perfect match. In fact, initial plans for the show involved a 10-year-old boy and a 6-year-old girl. But when producers saw the chemistry between Whitaker and Jones, they were rewritten as 6-year-old twins. It was a decision that would define the series. Their bond felt real because they were 2 kids navigating the strange world of television production together. For Whitaker, acting started almost as soon as he could walk. He began his career at 3 in a car dealership commercial before landing roles in Mattel toy ads and the soap opera General Hospital, in 1965. His big film break came in the 1966 comedy, The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming, starring Brian Keith. Keith, a veteran actor known for his gruff exterior but kindness toward child actors, was so impressed with young Johnny that when he was cast as Uncle Bill, he recommended Whitaker to play his nephew. It was a fateful suggestion. Whitaker, with his expressive eyes and natural charm, was perfect as Jody. He was inquisitive, a little mischievous, but always deeply sensitive. He was the quintessential little boy, grappling with big feelings in a world of adults. And in one episode, those feelings became painfully, unforgettably real. In the first season of Family Affair, an episode titled Mrs. Beasley, Where Are You?, aired. On its face, the plot is simple. Buffy's beloved doll, Mrs. Beasley, goes missing. For Buffy, the doll is more than a toy, she's a confidant, a tangible link to her life before the tragedy that brought her to New York. Without her, Buffy is lost. The episode follows the family's frantic search for the doll, which Jodie had accidentally dropped off their high-rise terrace while playing. While the story is about Buffy's loss, it required an extraordinary emotional performance from her on-screen brother. At just 6 years old, Johnny Whitaker had to portray a storm of emotions: guilt for causing his sister's pain, fear of what would happen, and deep sadness for her. This wasn't about hitting a mark, it was about digging into a well of sorrow that most kids are never asked to find. And for Johnny, the performance became terrifyingly real. In interviews years later, Whitaker has spoken about the emotional toll of his work. He revealed that the tears Jodie cried on screen weren't from an acting trick like glycerin drops, they were Johnny's own real, gut-wrenching tears. He described the experience as forcing him to confront feelings of fear and vulnerability that he was too young to process. Imagine being 6. Your world is a blur of scripts, cameras, and directions. You're told you're a professional for performing on cue. And now, the script demands that you break down and cry. For a child, the line between pretending to feel something and actually feeling it is razor thin. Jodie was feeling the loss of his parents and was terrified of hurting his sister, his anchor in this new world. To bring that to life, Johnny Whitaker had to draw from a place of genuine fear. He later called the experience emotionally exhausting. The director and producers praised his performance, calling it a triumph. But what they were celebrating was, in essence, a child's real-time emotional breakdown, captured on film for millions. The success of the episode came at a personal cost. It created what Whitaker would later call a capsule of pain, a memory so distressing that it came to symbolize the dark side of his work. This is why that episode stands out not as a piece of his portfolio, but as a permanent record of his own childhood suffering. The trauma of filming that episode was a symptom of a much larger problem for many child stars: the blurring of lines between their on-screen character and their real self. For Johnny Whitaker, being Jodie was more than a job. It's been reported that the cast worked for 9 months out of the year. Brian Keith had a special contract allowing him to film all of his scenes in a fraction of that time, which meant the children often worked long hours filming their parts around his pre-shot footage. Johnny has described a routine of waking up at 6 a.m., being at the studio by 8, and then shuffling between the set and a studio classroom. It was his normal. When your daily life is so tied to a fictional character, who are you when the cameras stop? For a child whose identity is still forming, that question can be dangerously confusing. The emotional premise of Family Affair, the loss of parents, made this blurring even more intense. This wasn't just a plot point, it was a theme Johnny and his on-screen sister, Anissa Jones, had to engage with day after day. They were surrounded by supportive adults who were not their parents. Brian Keith was a father figure on screen, but in reality, he was a co-worker on a tight schedule. This created a strange reality for the young actors. They were adored by millions of fans who saw them as Buffy and Jodie, but in their real lives, they were working children in a high-pressure industry. The love they received was for their characters, not always for them. Whitaker's experience on Mrs. Beasley, Where Are You?, was the moment this tension broke through. The script demanded an emotional crisis, and without the support to separate the fiction from his own feelings, he simply broke. His pain was real, yet it was packaged and sold as entertainment. That episode became a symbol of this painful paradox, a moment when he learned his own genuine emotions could be used for a TV show, a heavy burden for a 6-year-old. The story of Johnny Whitaker is a powerful reminder that behind our most cherished TV memories are real people with real struggles. It forces us to look past the nostalgia and consider the human cost of entertainment. We often celebrate child actors without fully understanding the pressure they face. Did you grow up watching Family Affair? Do you remember that episode? Let us know in the comments what you remember about the show, and if this story changes how you see it. And if you're finding this story compelling, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next look into the unseen stories of classic television. The pressures of being a child star didn't end when the show did. For Johnny Whitaker, the challenges continued long after Family Affair wrapped in 1971, casting a long shadow over his life. The most profound tragedy was the fate of his on-screen twin, Anissa Jones. Anissa struggled to escape her identity as Buffy and fell in with a dangerous crowd. Her life spiraled into drug use. Johnny, then a teenager navigating his own post-sitcom life, tried to reach out to her but couldn't get through. In 1976, just 5 years after the show ended, Anissa Jones died of a massive drug overdose. She was only 18. Anissa's death was a seismic event for Whitaker. He said, "It really shook me up." As a good Mormon boy, he decided to step away from an industry he felt had contributed to his friend's tragic end. He served a 2-year mission for his church in Portugal, looking for normalcy far from Hollywood. When he returned, however, Hollywood had moved on. As he put it, the business doesn't like when you leave it. It doesn't mind leaving you, but if you leave it, you don't recover easily. The adorable kid was now a young man, and the roles weren't there. That rejection, combined with the unresolved trauma of his childhood and grief over Anissa, led to a period of deep personal struggle. In his adulthood, Whitaker faced a harrowing battle with addiction. The catalyst was a painful divorce when his wife left him. This betrayal shattered his world. He said, "I lost my faith in God and man and the world, and turned to drugs and alcohol to escape." This dark period lasted for nearly a decade, during which he lost his homes and almost his life. The emotional instability that started on a soundstage as a child had finally caught up with him. It's not a straight line from filming a difficult episode at 6 to battling addiction at 30, but it's part of a larger pattern. The capsule of pain, created during that episode, was one of the first cracks in a foundation that wasn't built to handle the heavy blows of adult life. The turning point for Johnny Whitaker didn't come from a director's cue, but from his family. They staged an intervention and gave him an ultimatum: get clean, or be cut off from the family, including his young nephews. That was the wake-up call he needed. He chose recovery. He entered a 12-step program and began to rebuild his life. But he didn't just get sober, he found a new purpose. In his own recovery, he discovered a passion for helping others fighting the same battles. He became a certified drug and alcohol counselor and founded a non-profit organization to help Spanish-speaking addicts find resources. His life had come full circle. The man whose childhood emotions were once captured for entertainment was now using his life experiences, the good and the devastatingly bad, to offer real help. He began working with inmates and advocating for prison reform. He said one of the most heartbreaking things he heard from inmates was, "You guys are the first people in 10 years to treat me like a human being." This mission to restore dignity to those who feel lost became his life's work. He sees his journey not as a series of tragedies, but as a path. "I look at this as my destiny," he once said. "I have not always made the right choices in my life, but everything happens for a reason." In this new chapter, he found a way to turn his pain into purpose. The same sensitivity that made him so vulnerable as a child on a TV set is what now allows him to connect with and counsel people at their lowest moments. He understands their pain because he's lived it. The story behind Mrs. Beasley, Where Are You? Is more than just Hollywood trivia. It's a deeply human story about memory, trauma, and the hidden costs of our collective nostalgia. That single episode acts as a time capsule, a moment when the magic of television was created through the very real emotional turmoil of a child. It represents the blurring of fantasy and reality that can leave lasting scars, but Johnny Whitaker's story doesn't end with that pain. It's also a powerful tale of resilience. He survived the pressures of child stardom, the tragedy of losing a dear friend, and the depths of his own addiction. He emerged not with bitterness, but with a profound sense of purpose, to be of service to others. He transformed that capsule of pain into a wellspring of empathy. Today, Johnny Whitaker is clean and sober, an advocate, a counselor, and living proof that it's possible to rewrite your own story. He may not need to rewatch that difficult episode from 1966. He has already taken its most painful lessons and used them to build a life of meaning, proving that the brightest lights aren't always on a Hollywood set, but in the quiet work of helping another person find their way out of the dark.